Welcome to The Cellar. Welcome to another collection of horrible fates. As I always like to do, I like to be up front in the beginning of these videos that this is a collection of stories previously covered on the channel. Some of you prefer when I do large collections of horrible fates, and typically once I have 10 or so stories that haven't been featured within a collection before, well, then I create a new collection for you all to enjoy. A quick thank you to everyone for supporting the channel. We just broke 25,000 subscribers, and that is simply amazing. If you do enjoy what I do here, please consider subscribing. Also, like the video and leave a comment. It helps appease the algorithm gods here on YouTube. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this collection of horrible fates. It was 2 days before Christmas in 2010. A 39-year-old man from Murdashaw named Alan Catterall was hard at work cleaning machinery at Piranha Moldings. To give some more details, Murdashaw, where Alan lived, is located on the southern edge of Runcorn, Newtown. Runcorn is an industrial town and cargo port in the borough of Halton, Cheshire, England. Runcorn is on the southern bank of the River Mersey, where the estuary narrows to form the Runcorn Gap. The area's population is around 62,000 residents. To give you all some more context on the place that Alan worked at, I found this company's statement on their website. It reads, "Piranha Moldings are manufacturers of specialist whitewater kayaks. They are designed by our international team and built in Britain. Piranha kayaks are designed and built to the highest standards to be used by the most demanding paddlers on rivers across the world for river running, creeking, and freestyle kayak." Alan, at the time, had worked for the company for close to 12 years. It was back-breaking work, but he loved his job. One of the biggest reasons Alan enjoyed going to work every day was that his wife, daughter, and future son-in-law all worked for the company. It was 7 a.m., and Alan and his future son-in-law were sitting in the break room. They were discussing Christmas and the pure excitement of getting to share all the gifts they got for one another in just a couple of days. As their conversation came to an end, it was time to get to work. Alan's future son-in-law, Mark, would head up to the control room, while Alan made his way down to the factory floor. Alan's job was to make sure all the machinery that the factory used to mold and build the kayaks was clean and fully operational. Alan had been maintaining the machinery for quite some time, so it was easy to say that he knew every piece of equipment inside and out. Alan's attention was soon focused on checking out the different molding rooms within the factory floor. One of these particular molding rooms Alan knew was shut down at the time. It had recently had an issue with its circuit board, and thus the company's leadership had made the decision to shut the room down. As Alan approached the room and looked inside, he noticed it was in dire need of a good cleaning. When kayak molds were placed within these molding rooms, a lot of the time, excess plastic would seep out of the molds and end up getting caked to the walls within. As Alan looked around inside the room, he made the decision that now was as good of a time as ever to get this molding room cleaned up. Alan would leave the room and go and fetch his crowbar. He then proceeded back into the molding room and began chipping away at all the caked-on plastic within. Alan would chip away at plastic for a few moments before suddenly the door to the molding room would slam shut, leaving Alan in complete darkness within. Alan would immediately know that he was in a dire situation. The doors shutting signified to Alan that the circuit board must have been repaired. If the circuit board had been repaired, then that would mean the molding room he was now locked inside of was fully operational. Up in the control room, Alan's future son-in-law Mark was standing in front of a large switchboard that controlled all of the equipment out on the work floor. Soon, a particular blinking light on the switchboard got Mark's attention. The blinking light was for the molding room that Alan had been cleaning out. As Mark looked at the light, he knew that this meant the broken circuit board had been fixed to this particular room. Not even giving it a second thought, he instinctively flicked the on switch. When he did, the molding room began its restart process, locking down the door and subsequently trapping Alan inside. Panicked and in the dark, Alan now took his crowbar and ran to the door of the machine. He knew time was against him as he desperately tried to pry the door open. When that didn't work, Alan did the only thing he could think of. He started to scream for help while banging on the doors and walls with his crowbar. His panicked brain was screaming at him to get out. You only have mere minutes to get out. Out on the factory floor, workers continued on about their day. The noise of the machinery within the factory made it impossible for anyone to hear Alan's cries for help. As Alan continued desperately screaming and banging around, he noticed the walls inside begin to turn red. This molding room was basically just a giant oven. An oven that would reach temperatures of almost 600 degrees in under 10 minutes. As the temperature continued to rise within, the floor began glowing red as well. Gaining temperature, Alan soon had to let go of the metal crowbar as it too was getting too hot to hold on to. Alan would continue frantically banging against the walls, but each time Alan's skin made contact, it would burn him to increasingly severe degrees, leaving bits of himself charred to the walls of the oven. Pretty soon, Alan's shoes would begin to melt, and in pure agony, Alan could no longer stand or even breathe due to the intense heat that was engulfing him. Out on the work floor, no one would know something was wrong until black smoke started to pour from within the molding room. When the smoke was seen, the room was shut down and the door was finally opened. Alan was found, but by this point, it was far too late. He had already succumbed to one of the most horrible fates imaginable. In the aftermath, an investigation took place to figure out what went so horribly wrong. I will read you all some of the findings now. Martin Haywood, the investigating inspector at the Health and Safety Executive, said, "The doors were set to automatically close whenever the electrical supply was switched back on, which meant there was a high risk of someone being trapped inside. There had been no risk assessments and staff had not received suitable training on how to use the new ovens, and there was no written instructions on cleaning or maintenance. If Piranha Moldings and the individual prosecuted over Alan's death had properly considered the risks to employees when they designed, installed, and operated the ovens, then he would still be here today." 5 years after the incident, the kayak company was found guilty of corporate manslaughter and fined £200,000. The molding rooms were designed with no escape hatch and basically no safety precautions whatsoever. In looking at what happened and how the company went about its day-to-day, it seems like it was only a matter of time before a tragedy like this ended up taking place. My deepest condolences go out to Alan Catterall, as well as all of his family and friends. Margarita Liga was a 41-year-old wife and mother of two from Piave. Piave is a small town in the northeastern Trento region of Italy. It was July 4th, 2024, and Margarita and her family were hiking in the Classica Castiglione mountain region. From all reports, they were on their way to spend some time at a cabin in the area. From my research, there are only a handful of private homes in the hamlet of Drocala. Drocala is where the cabin the family was heading to was located. In order to get there, the family had to travel using a cableway that connected the Aligno hamlet with the Drocala alpine pasture. From my research, the cableway travels a 1,300-foot or 400-meter distance over an extremely steep gully. As the family arrived at the cableway around 11 a.m., they approached the cable car that was intended for luggage only. Margarita would begin loading her family's luggage when her clothing became snagged on the cable car. Before she could free herself, the machine suddenly switched on, unexpectedly, and Margarita was soon hanging on for her life. Margarita's family, along with others, looked on in horror as the contraption carried her 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 yards over a cliff edge. Margarita continued to hang on for dear life, but at around 50 yards, she could no longer hold her weight. She looked one last time in the direction of her family before her hands were forced to let go. The wife and mother of two would then plummet around 500 feet to the unforgiving ground below. What makes this story all the more horrifying is that Margarita's husband and two young ones had to watch on in horror as their mother was taken from them. Following the tragedy, an investigation was soon underway. At the time of recording this, the investigation is still ongoing, and I was unable to find any details as to why the cable car began moving when it did. Whatever the reason, a family was horribly scarred in the midst of a trip that should have brought them all nothing but joy. As always, my deepest condolences go out to Margarita as well as all of her family and friends. For this next story, we will be heading to Manitoba. Manitoba is a Canadian province bordered by Ontario to the east and Saskatchewan to the west. It is Canada's fifth most populous province, with a population of around 1,342,000 residents. Manitoba has a widely varied landscape, from Arctic tundra and the Hudson Bay coastline in the north to the dense boreal forest, large freshwater lakes, and prairie grassland in the central and southern regions. It was Friday, July 25, 2008, and 15-year-old Andrew James of Manitoba got up in the morning, showered, dressed, and prepared for a day of work. From my research, in order for someone of Andrew's age to work in Manitoba, he had to have applied and obtained a permit from the Provincial Employment Standards Branch, as anyone under the age of 16 is required to do. Andrew James was working for a paving company that was in the midst of completing repairs near an old Manitoba hydro substation located on Quarry Road. As Andrew and the crew began their day of work, Andrew would soon find himself helping to unload asphalt off the back of a truck. As Andrew continued helping unload the asphalt, tragedy would strike. From all reports, Andrew would suddenly lose his footing while shoveling asphalt from a trailer box into a backhoe scoop. As the asphalt continued to come down, the young man would soon become completely buried under the material. And for those that don't know, hot mix asphalt pavement is usually at a temperature between 275 and 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Fellow workers on site would soon rush to the aid of Andrew, trying frantically to dig him out. Many of the workers that tried to free him would suffer burns in the process, as emergency services were soon called to the scene. The Stony Mountain Fire Department would soon arrive, and it would take them close to 15 minutes to finally clear the asphalt away. But by then, it was far too late. The fire chief was quoted as saying, "We arrived on scene, and there was an individual buried by asphalt. Only his hair was sticking out. Individuals buried in that much fill or asphalt or anything, well, he's deceased. Because your body cannot survive that. The material was so hot, the rescuers' toes were burning inside of their boots." Following the incident, an investigation would take place. The owner of the paving company would end up being fined $33,500 for the incident, with the owner stating that he felt tremendous guilt for Andrew's death, as he considered the young man to be like a son. As for Andrew's parents, they have stood by the owner of the paving company and have made it very clear that they hold no ill will towards the man, as Andrew's death was nothing more than a tragic accident. My deepest condolences go out to Andrew as well as all of his family and friends. Lynn Fleming was a 77-year-old woman from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. After retiring, Lynn finally made the decision to move to Florida, something she had always dreamed of doing. She would end up moving to Ellenton, Florida. Ellenton is an unincorporated community in Manatee County, Florida. The population there is around 4,100 residents. Allenton is part of the North Port, Bradenton, Sarasota, Florida metropolitan area. Life in Florida was everything Lynn hoped it would be. The sunshine, the beach, the shopping. Lynn was truly living her best life, and that joy would continue on for another 3 to 4 years. In June of 2019, Lynn's son, wife, and their 2 children decided to make the long drive south from Pittsburgh. The drive was long, but the family was excited to spend a week in Florida with Lynn. On June 14, 2019, the group would head out to visit Coquina Beach. Coquina Beach is a 22-acre beach located on Anna Maria Island. Coquina Beach is home to Gulfside Park and the family-friendly Coquina Baywalk. From what's reported, the family spent the day at the beach enjoying the sights, the sun, and the water. At some point, while Lynn was walking through the water, she would step in a small dip in the ground. Lynn would stumble and bump her leg. She would end up with a 3/4-inch cut located on her left shin. After exiting the water and checking the wound, a lifeguard would be called over. The lifeguard was very diligent and helped clean the wound out and provided a bandage for Lynn's leg. Following that incident, the day would carry on, and Lynn and the family would even go out later that very night with friends. The following morning, Lynn's son checked on the wound and proceeded to clean it up once again, applying a fresh clean bandage when he was done. Following this, Lynn's son and the family would begin packing their car as their vacation had come to an end and they had a long trek ahead of them back to Pittsburgh. Lynn's son and family would soon say goodbye and head off, and Lynn would go back to her quiet, peaceful, retired life. Later that afternoon, Lynn's son received a phone call from his mother expressing that she was now in some pain. The longer the weekend went on, the more Lynn's leg hurt in the area of the cut that she had suffered. By the time Lynn woke up Sunday morning, her leg was red and swollen badly. She soon traveled to an urgent care facility. Doctors there would provide Lynn with a tetanus shot and a round of antibiotics, hoping that would do the trick and get Lynn back on track. On Monday, June 17th, a friend of Lynn's went and picked up her antibiotic prescription. They then traveled over to Lynn's house and proceeded to knock on her front door. There was no answer, and after waiting a moment, this friend proceeded to enter Lynn's home to see if she was all right. They looked in her living room and all throughout her house, before finally locating her on her bedroom floor. Lynn was unconscious, and her entire left shin had turned black in color. An ambulance was immediately called, and Lynn was rushed to the nearby hospital. As the doctors worked to figure out what was wrong, Lynn's son was soon contacted. He and his wife quickly rushed back to Florida, going as fast as they could get there to be by his mother's side. By the time they arrived, Lynn was on life support. She had suffered 2 strokes and complete kidney failure. To put it bluntly, her entire body had quickly gone septic. As Thursday rolled around, Lynn's condition did not improve. She would pass on while her son held her hand that very same day. So what happened? How did a small cut end up taking Lynn's life in less than a week? Well, it turns out Lynn developed necrotizing fasciitis, which is also known as flesh-eating disease. Necrotizing fasciitis is a bacterial infection that affects the tissue under your skin called fascia. It's normally treated with antibiotics and surgery to remove damaged tissue. Lynn underwent numerous surgeries and antibiotics, but by the time she was brought to the hospital, too much damage had already been done. Quick intervention is vital when dealing with the bacteria. You'll require exploratory surgery to confirm the diagnosis. Surgery is also required to remove dead tissue, often taking multiple surgeries to control the infection and remove all of the dead tissue. Even with an early diagnosis, 1 out of every 3 people end up dying from the disease, often due to massive organ failure throughout the body. Every summer in the US, as the waters along the coastline warm up, cases of the bacteria start to grow. The bacteria typically thrives in water with temperatures that stay above 55 degrees year-round, leading to numerous cases throughout the southern portion of the Atlantic coastline. For Lynn, an amazing day out with her family tragically turned deadly all through one seemingly innocuous cut. I hope that in sharing her story, I'm able to spread more awareness about the dangers of the disease. Stay vigilant and don't ignore the warning signs, as quick and early diagnosis may be the difference between life and death. My deepest condolences go out to Lynn Fleming, as well as all her family and friends. Now, this next story happens to have another woman named Lynn Fleming within it. It was Tuesday, May 16th, 2023. 68-year-old Lynn Fleming of Beaufort, Georgia, was riding in the passenger seat of a Toyota Highlander as it traveled along Interstate 75 near Dalton, about 90 miles north of the city of Atlanta. To give some further context, Beaufort is a city located in both northern Gwinnett County and northern Georgia, with a small portion of it extending north into Hall County. The city is considered a suburb of the Atlanta metropolitan area. From my research, Interstate 75 runs from as far north as the Great Lakes to as south as Miami, Florida. It ends just before Miami, to be precise. The part of I-75 that Lynn was traveling throughout on this day took her near the city of Dalton. Dalton is located just off I-75 within the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in northwest Georgia. Dalton is the second largest city in northwest Georgia, just after Rome. It was just before 2 p.m. as the car Lynn sat in began approaching exit 326, Carbondale Road, Dalton, Georgia. The vehicle was driving in the southbound lane, and Lynn was conversing with the driver of the vehicle. Whatever happened next, Lynn never saw coming. A winch bar, which is basically a pipe-like tool that is used for tightening cargo on flatbed trailers, would come crashing through the passenger side windshield of the Toyota Highlander. The pipe would instantly impale Lynn through her neck. She never even had a moment's notice to react to what was about to happen. The driver of the vehicle would immediately pull off to the side of the road and call for help. Emergency services would soon be called to the scene. A Life Force helicopter would land on the highway, and medical personnel tried to save Lynn's life. It wouldn't take medical personnel long to declare Lynn gone at the scene. The injury and blood loss was just too severe for the 68-year-old mother and grandmother to overcome. I did some more digging and found that an astonishing 1,182 vehicle passengers died on the state roads of Georgia in 2021 alone, with over 1,700 traffic fatalities in 2020. That's just for the state of Georgia. If anything, the story just goes to show that sometimes, when it's your time, it's your time. I've learned while covering stories within my Horrible Fate series that you truly may never see what's coming to end your life. And I'm not saying to live life in fear, but always be aware of your surroundings no matter the situation. For life is fragile, and life can cease within mere moments, and you may never be none the wiser. As always, my deepest condolences go out to Lynn Fleming, as well as all her family and friends. Now, there isn't a ton of background information on this next story, but I'll do my best to relay what happened. Kalita Nicole Hicks was a 20-year-old woman from Olive Hill, Kentucky. Olive Hill is a small city that sits along Tigard's Creek within Carter County, Kentucky. The population is listed as being around 1,600 residents in total. According to reports, it was August of 2010, and Kalita Hicks was out driving in her T-top convertible on Kentucky Route 519, just north of Moorhead. It's not clear how long she had been driving at the time, but at some point, Kalita and the passenger decided to switch places. Instead of pulling the vehicle over and getting out, they figured they would swap spots right then and there while driving at 70 miles per hour. As I stated, the vehicle was a T-top. For those that don't know, a T-top is an automobile roof with a removable panel on each side of a rigid bar running from the center of one structural bar between pillars to the center of the next structural bar. I will show a picture for reference. Kalita would stand up first. She lifted her foot and attempted to step and slide to her right past her friend. As she did, her foot inadvertently hit the steering wheel. This caused the car to veer off course, and as it did, her friend immediately noticed and grabbed for the steering wheel. As the car veered left, Kalita's friend yanked right. The car immediately corrected, but as it did, The momentum hurled Kalita right out of the car and straight into a guardrail on the side of the road. Emergency services were called to the scene, and Kalita was transported to the University of Kentucky Hospital. She would undergo emergency surgery, but doctors were unable to save her life. This story once again goes to show how fragile life is and how one silly decision can lead to your ultimate demise. My condolences go out to Kalita as well as all her family and friends. It was June 7, 2016, and 23-year-old Colin Scott, a psychology graduate from Pacific University, had just traveled from Portland, Oregon to Yellowstone National Park to meet up with his sister Sable. Colin had just recently graduated, and after speaking to his sister, the pair had decided to take a day trip to the infamous Yellowstone Park. After the pair met up, they drove around Yellowstone, eventually finding a place to park their vehicle that wasn't far from the Norris Geyser Basin. Norris Geyser Basin is the hottest, oldest, and most dynamic of Yellowstone's thermal areas. The pair would soon exit their vehicle and begin walking around, checking out the numerous sights to be seen. At some point on their adventure, they deviated from the route that traveled through the thermal areas within the basin. The pair at the time had one thing on their mind. They wanted to go hot potting. To give some context, hot potting is the practice of soaking within a natural hot spring. Yellowstone has many places where people will travel to take part in the practice, but there's a great danger in exploring within restricted areas. Colin and Sable continued their trek, traveling hundreds of feet up a hill near one of the many hot springs. At the time, Sable had her phone out and was filming the pair's exploits. According to reports, the video shows the pair deviate from the path and travel near a hot pool. Colin then kneels down to examine the temperature of the hot spring. It's at this point that Colin slips and plunges face first into the water. Colin's sister would immediately try to save her brother, but the moment the skin on her body made contact with the water, she became burned badly. Under normal circumstances, the water at Norris Geyser reaches around 199 degrees Fahrenheit or 93 degrees Celsius. On this particular day, the water had reached an unbelievably high temperature of 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. Unable to help her brother, Sable attempted to call for help, but cell service within the area is non-existent, and thus there was not a thing Sable could do for her brother. Sable began running from the scene, eventually locating the Ranger Museum, where she was able to alert someone as to what had transpired. Officials at the park would be notified, and they immediately traveled to the site of where Colin had fallen in. When they arrived, they found the remains of Colin's head, upper torso, and hands. With the hot springs being as hot as they were on this day, they were unable to even attempt to recover his remains. Officials had to wait until the following day, and by the time they returned, Colin's body was gone. From what's reported, the acidic nature of the pool, combined with the extreme temperature, simply dissolved Scott's body. Officials were able to recover a few things from within the hot springs. His wallet and flip-flops had survived, but that was all that was left of Colin Scott. I can only imagine the emotional scar that Colin's sister Sable must carry with her every day. A fun-filled trip with her brother turned to absolute tragedy. This is not the first time I've covered a story about the Yellowstone hot springs. From what I read, at least 22 people have perished within the springs of Yellowstone since 1890. Please let this be a reminder not to wander into restricted areas within the park. My deepest condolences go out to Colin Scott, his sister Sable, as well as all his family and friends. Erica Marshall was a 28-year-old woman who grew up in Medford, New Jersey. Medford is a township in Burlington County. The township has a population of around 25,000 residents. Erica grew up loving horses, and that love would eventually lead her to studying equine science at Hyperbaric College near Gloucester, England. While attending school, Erica would meet her future husband, Kieran Marshall. The pair would marry and move to Ocala, Florida in 2010. Erica was offered a role at the Kentucky Equine Sports and Rehab Center, and she couldn't pass up the opportunity. Ocala, Florida is located in north-central Florida. The city has a population of around 63,000 total residents. Ocala is the principal city of the Ocala metropolitan area, which has a population of around 375,000 total residents. Ocala is considered the horse capital of the world, as it is home to over 400 thoroughbred farms and training centers. It's easy to say that Erica was living her best life. She married the man she loved and was able to move and work within the horse capital of the world. And that now brings us to February 10th, 2012. Erica was working on treating a horse at the Kesmark Equine Rehab Facility in Morriston, Florida. The horse was suffering from a disease known as EPM. EPM is a neurological disease that horses get from eating infected opossum feces. Incoordination, muscle atrophy, and loss of feeling around the body are some of the symptoms of the illness. In order to treat the horse, Erica was using a hyperbaric chamber. I found in my research that oxygen therapy can benefit a horse with EPM, as ozone and oxygen go through the blood-brain barrier, so it is an excellent way to aid treatment of any kind of neurological disease, including EPM. Erica had been running the hyperbaric chamber for over 2 years, as it had become a part of her daily job. She would treat anywhere between 2 to 6 horses every day, so it's easy to say she had become a bit of a pro at this point. Erica would soon begin bringing the horse into the chamber. She was accompanied at the time by Surha Monali, who was a 33-year-old woman from Ireland. She was visiting at the time and was there as an observer. Erica and Surha would get the horse into the chamber with no issues. The horse had never given them any problems in the past, so they felt no need to tranquilize the horse for its follow-up treatment. As the treatment began, all seemed normal. This was a normal everyday task for Erica, and she didn't believe this particular day would be any different than the many that had come before. But as the treatment continued, the horse began getting agitated. Erica would attempt to calm the horse down, but for some reason the horse wasn't having it on this day. It began kicking against the wall of the chamber. Now, the chambers are covered in a special padding inside to protect the metal wall. But as the horse continued kicking, it managed to kick straight through a portion of the padding. As the horse's metal shoe came into contact and scraped along the metal wall, it created a spark. The one thing that can't occur within a hyperbaric chamber then occurred. That spark would immediately ignite the pure oxygen that was filling the room. In an instant, the hyperbaric chamber would explode. Erica Marshall's life, as well as the horse's, were ended right then and there. Surha Monali would miraculously survive the ordeal. She was immediately airlifted to Shands Hospital in Gainesville, Florida. She suffered serious injuries and had to undergo numerous surgeries, but she would pull through in the end. Following the incident, the police would investigate and ultimately rule what transpired as just a horrible accident. But that would not stop Erica's husband from eventually filing a lawsuit against everyone involved in his late wife's death. From what's been reported in the lawsuit, in the weeks leading up to the accident, officials at Kesmark discovered that the hyperbaric chamber was not functioning properly. They relayed their concerns to Equine Oxygen Therapy Resources Incorporated, who were supposed to repair the chamber before the accident. The lawsuit also points out that Kesmark continued to operate the chamber even though the repairs were not performed. With no repairs performed, his wife Erica would eventually perish within that chamber. Now, it's not clear if what happened to Erica was directly related to the repairs that needed to be done, but nonetheless, if the chamber was in need of a repair, it should have been shut down until the repairs had been complete. And at the end of the day, the lawsuit will not bring Erica back, and all I can hope is that she didn't suffer in the end. I want to send my deepest condolences to Erica's husband, her family, and all of her friends. Maria Pantazopoulos was a 30-year-old real estate agent from Laval, Quebec. Laval is a city located in Quebec, Canada. It is in the southwest of the province, north of Montreal. Laval is the third largest city in the province after Montreal and Quebec City, and the 13th largest city in all of Canada. Laval has a population of roughly 443,000 residents. It was Friday, August 17, 2012. Maria had a photo shoot planned later that afternoon. At the time, Maria was on top of the world. She had just recently purchased a home and had started working as a real estate agent with Via Capital. To add to it all, she had just gotten married back on June 9th. Following her wedding, Maria and her husband enjoyed a beautiful honeymoon in the Caribbean. It's easy to say that life was going really well for Maria. After getting done with some work-related business, Maria picked up her wedding dress and headed to her photo shoot. Maria was described as someone who was extremely fun. Maria absolutely did not want her wedding dress to be packed away, collecting dust in a box or closet somewhere, so she had decided to do a Trash the Dress photo shoot. For those that don't know what that is, Trash the Dress is a style of wedding photography that contrasts elegant feminine clothing with an environment that is out of place. The photos are typically shot in the style of fashion or glamour photography, often taking place on a beach, lake, stream, city streets, you name it. Within the photo, the dress is typically trashed by getting it wet, dirty, or even at times destroying the garment altogether. From my research, most people agree that the Trash the Dress picture idea started trending fairly recently back in 2001. That's when Las Vegas wedding photographer John Michael Cooper got bored of shooting traditional wedding scenes. He soon convinced some open-minded brides to pose in grungy offbeat settings, and thus the Trash the Dress phenomenon began and has continued on since. Maria soon arrived at the agreed-upon photo shoot location. The photographer taking the pictures had recommended a location along the Uru River in Rawdon, about 75 kilometers northeast of Montreal. From all reports, the first batch of photos went well. She was in shallow water and having a blast taking photos and posing in her dress. Soon, Maria decided she wanted to take some pictures of herself floating within the water. Now, I have seen numerous ways this is reported, so I'm going to try and get it as accurate as can be. But from what's been said, Maria's dress soon became heavy and soaked within the river. As she tried to stay afloat, it soon became apparent that the dress was going to pull her under. As it did, the photographer attempted to get a hold of Maria and help guide her back to where she could stand. It only took a brief moment before Maria's head slipped below the water. The photographer desperately tried to help Maria. The more he tried to help her, the more he kept getting pulled under the water with her. According to the photographer, he tried numerous times to save her, but she eventually lost what strength she had and eventually let go of him, slipping away into the river's current. Numerous attempts were made to dive in and find Maria, but she was gone in an instant. Emergency services were soon called to the scene, and a local diver ended up showing up to help the cause. At around 4:30 p.m., the local diver discovered Maria's body in the water and soon pulled her out of the river. Maria had been on top of the world, and in an instant, her life was taken in such a tragic manner. Her story just goes to show that life is not fair. It doesn't play favorites, and sometimes your end can come when you least expect it. As always, my deepest condolences go out to Maria, as well as all her family and friends. Mariessa Weber was a 38-year-old woman from Newport Richey, Florida. Newport Richey is a city in Pasco County, Florida. The city's population is around 16,000 residents. Now, there's not a ton of information in regards to the story, but according to reports, Mariessa still lived at home with numerous members of her family. The conditions within this home were not all that pleasant, to say the least. The house was full of trash in every corner of every room. There were birds, cats, and dogs in cages. It wasn't the cleanliest of living conditions for anyone. Which now brings us to the end of October 2006. Mariessa came home one day, and according to her family, she just vanished. It didn't take long before Mariessa's family contacted law enforcement, and an official search was underway. 12 days would pass with no sign of Mariessa. As every day went by, the family felt more and more hopeless, not knowing where she could have gone or what could have possibly happened to her. As each day passed, the family began smelling something awful within the house. With the living conditions being what they were already, the family chalked the smell up to dead rodents in the walls of the home. That was until day 12 rolled around. That was the day Mariessa was finally found. Mariessa's sister would enter Mariessa's room and have another look around. As she looked through, she got a glimpse of something behind the bookshelf. Now, this bookshelf was described as being 6 foot tall and extremely heavy. As she attempted to look behind it, she finally located her sister. She was there in the house the entire time. While they were out looking for her, she was right there in her bedroom, just under their nose. So what happened to Mariessa? Well, from what has been reported, she had stepped on something in order to reach around the back of the bookcase and plug an item into the wall. As she did, she lost her balance and fell headfirst, getting herself stuck between the bookcase and the wall. Now, from what's been reported by the police, Mariessa was 5'2" and only 79 pounds. She was a very petite girl, so when she got wedged behind the heavy bookcase, there wasn't much she could do to shake herself free of it. It's ultimately unclear how long she was stuck back there still alive. It could have been minutes, hours, or it could have been a couple of days. But eventually, she succumbed to positional asphyxiation. Positional asphyxiation occurs when an individual is placed in a position that ultimately obstructs the breathing. To add to it all, a toxicology report would later reveal that Mariessa had a large cocktail of drugs within her system. She had recently taken morphine, codeine, marijuana, an antihistamine, an anti-inflammatory, an antidepressant known as Celexa, and an anti-anxiety drug called Xanax. Between her petite frame and the massive cocktail that she had consumed, the combination really put Mariessa in a bad place when she had become wedged behind that bookcase. In the end, I can't imagine what her family must have felt when they finally located her, knowing that she was so close, yet seemingly so far at the very same time. No one should have to go out alone like that. As always, my deepest condolences go out to all of Mariessa's family and friends. So for this last story, I would like you all to take it with a grain of salt. I was researching online and came about a story someone posted about an accident that took place within a poultry factory back in the 70s or 80s. The exact date was not given. After I finished reading the story, it really stuck with me and made me want to cover it on the channel. So I tried to find some corroborating evidence for this particular story, but was ultimately unable to do so. Does that mean that it didn't occur? Not necessarily, as sometimes stories back then would slip under the radar of the local newspapers, or perhaps I'm just not looking in the right places. But nonetheless, I found this story to be pretty captivating. I've covered so many horrible fates on the channel, and this story sounds completely plausible based on cases I've researched in the past. So with that warning up front, I would like to read you all a story that was posted by a man named Russell Cole on Quora.com. Warning: don't read this if you're squeamish, because this tale is truly the stuff of nightmares. My dad was chief engineer at a poultry processing plant in Clinton, Iowa in the 1970s and 80s. Portions of the building dated to the late 1800s, and despite the fact that much of the machinery was malfunctioning, obsolete, or simply worn out, it was the job of Dad's department to cobble things together in any way necessary in order to keep the place running. Much of this maintenance work involved the industrial version of string and baling wire repairs, as well as the tried and true mechanics technique of malletizing some recalcitrant bit of machinery. To meet the plant's insatiable need for crushed ice, there stood in an isolated corner of the top floor a creaky old device that was essentially Satan's version of a snow cone machine. A hulking V-shaped metal box, roughly the size of a dump truck, the machine worked in cycles, first freezing inch-thick sheets of ice on the inclined walls, the surface of which then warmed slightly, causing the large planks of ice to slip down and feed into the maw of a central trough where a row of powerful claw-like mechanical devices would activate, first pulverizing the ice into a sand-like consistency, followed by a screw auger which gathered up the crushed ice and forced it into a network of tubes which distributed the product to workstations throughout the plant. Despite a critical demand, the ice machine was not very reliable, and the formed ice sheets would often fail to slip free of the sloping surfaces, causing production in the plant to slow until someone from Dad's department was dispatched to free up the ice machine, a task that required someone to physically enter the ice machine and hammer loose the reluctant ice flow. Clearly, no sane person would set foot in such a device without first deactivating the terrifying array of claws at the bottom of the collecting trough. However, since this procedure happened so often, Barney had figured out he could pop in, straddle the walls, smash away the ice jam, and be out again before the ice crusher activated, thus saving a step or two. That was until he didn't. The first indication to anyone that Barney had miscalculated or lost his footing somehow was when screams erupted on the production floor as the iced-down remains of his macerated, pulped, and pulverized body was piped down to the production floor after having been fed into what was, in essence, an enormous sausage grinder. As you can see, this story is a horrifying one, and based on how working conditions were back in the day, it's one that I could totally see happening. I mean, even to this very day, accidents like this still occur. As I said, I have no evidence to back up this story, but I wanted to share it with you all nonetheless. And once again, I want to give my condolences to all those that lost someone within today's stories. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. If you enjoy the content, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel continue to grow. Also, if you want to make sure you don't ever miss a new upload, you can turn on the bell notification after you subscribe. In the description box below, you will find a link to my merch store and a link to the Cellar Dwellers membership tier for the channel. If you're interested, please take a moment to go check those things out. If you'd like to submit your own scary story or any kind of story recommendation, you can do so using the email linked in the description box below. As always, I do all the research, writing, recording, and editing for the channel myself, so anything you do to support the channel is greatly appreciated. Until next time, I will see you all again as we head back into the cellar.